Sam Spoon, and today I'm going to be talking to you about cameras. Cameras are everywhere. Like, everybody has a camera. Everybody knows, like, to take a picture. It's super easy. You just hit the little click button, and there you go, you have a picture. But there's actually a lot more into cameras that most people don't know about. And I'm going to, I'd like to inform you about some of those things today. So there are three main key elements that are in every camera, and I know about these elements because I've been taking photos for several years, and I had to use these elements to take these pictures. So those three mechanics that are in every camera are an ISO, a shutter speed, and an aperture, and they're very vital to taking a picture and taking a photograph and making it look really good. So the first one that I'm going to talk about is the aperture, and the aperture it controls how much light enters into your camera, and it will control how far your camera will see. So when you're taking a photo, there's sometimes it's oh, the front of it isn't quite in focus, but the background is totally in focus. And what I want to make look good in my photograph, that's not in focus. That's because your aperture is not looking at the right location. But that's sometimes it's purposeful and sometimes it's not in photography. But the aperture is kind of like this little circle that is inside of your lens, and when it opens up bigger, it lets in more light, and therefore it controls how much light is entering into your camera's sensor, and therefore what takes the picture or takes the photograph. The other thing that works very closely with this is the ISO, and the ISO is it's the mechanism in the sensor that reads the light that's coming in through the aperture. So this is, very sensitive, and it's something that you can control. You can control how sensitive it is when you're taking a photograph, and that's what can change how bright your photograph is. So if you have a very high ISO, you're going to have a very, very bright picture, and it's going to be very shiny, and it might be a little washed out and white, versus if you have a low ISO, it's going to be very dark and gloomy. Another thing that works well with the ISO and the aperture is your shutter speed. And the shutter speed is how long that the aperture stays open. So if the aperture is open for a really, really long amount of time, meaning 1 second, then you're going to have a very blurry picture, because lots happens in 1 second. There's so much movement that happens in the world in 1 second, and so when the camera is open for that amount of time, it's looking at all of this stuff for a total second. There's so much that can happen in 1 second, and so it creates more of this blurred effect in a photograph, versus when most people take pictures, they want it to have a much smaller time frame open on the shutter speed, so it's going to have a smaller shutter speed. So it's going to be it's more like 1/600th of a second, and that's a very small amount of time, and it sounds crazy, but your camera just opens up and closes immediately like that, so much quicker than we can even comprehend. It's 1/600th of a second that it happens in, and that is how the shutter speed works. So the longer your shutter speed, the more blurry your images are going to be, but the shorter your shutter speed, the more still and in action and caught in movement your image is going to be. And so all three of these really work together, because the aperture controls how much light is coming in, the shutter speed controls how long the aperture is staying open, and the ISO is reading all of that light that is coming in through the camera lens at the same time. And that's kind of just a little bit more about cameras, and I hope that you've learned a little bit more about photography, and maybe you can go out and maybe try it out sometime.